Hope you're having a great week. You know, we're just days away from Easter, and I want to remind you two things real quickly. First of all, this is the Sunday before time change. If you're watching me on the right day, that March 13th is this Sunday, and March 13th is when we spring forward. We don't like that day, but that means you turn your clock ahead on Saturday night before you go to bed, so you'll be where you need to be on Sunday morning. Don't forget to do that. Ladies, one other quick pitch. I hope to goodness you are one of those that's already signed up for Splash of Joy. Casey Van Norman is a remarkable lady. Talks about many things she had to overcome because of her life before Jesus. And then once she came to know him, the marvelous redemptive power of his amazing grace. Easter is a great time to think about that. She'll be here March the 22nd. Now here's the dilemma. Many of you are leaving this week on spring break. Get that ticket before you leave, because when you get back, it's too late. The door's closed, the deadline's passed. Ladies, go online to fbcba8.org or call the church office before you leave on spring break. Make sure you make a reservation so you'll have a place, all right? Well, all of this month at First Baptist Church, we're focused on Easter, and I'm sure many churches are. Each Sunday, we're dealing with some aspect of Easter, and this coming Sunday, I'm going to be talking about Gethsemane. It's amazing. Everybody wants to know about Easter, and everybody wants to come for the celebration of Easter. Nobody wants to talk about the agony of prayer. In fact, most people don't do real well at prayer. Probably no topic's had more books written about it, more sermons preached on it, more people talk about it, for so little of it to actually be done. I find it interesting that Gethsemane was on the night before the cross. You know the story. Jesus had just had the Lord's Supper and had the last Passover supper. The disciples walked out of the upper room through the eastern gate, out across the Kidron Valley, and up on the western slope of the Mount of Olives. And you can look right back down in the city, and boy, it'd have been alive. Passover was when everybody came home. 2 million Jews in the city, it said. Surveys have told us a few years after Jesus' life, that there were 2 million people in the city at Passover, which means they had to be camped at all the hills around. You can't put 2 million people in a walled city. So the city was vibrant. And here's all this joy and anticipation, and yet in the midst of that, it's one man who normally is the giver of joy. And the Bible says that night his heart was sorrowful unto death. In fact, in the Gospel of Mark, the Bible says he was deeply distressed, and the Holman Bible says horrified. What in the world would cause Jesus to do that? Why would he feel that? Well, obviously Jesus knew the burden that he was about to face. He had already seen Judas walk out of the room, so he knew Judas was on his way back to betray him. He took 11 men with him and posted 8 at the gate of a garden called Gethsemane. He probably had a wall and a gate to come in and out. He said, 8 men, you stay here. Meaning, don't let anybody disturb me during this next little while. I need to pray. It's about midnight. I mean, it's late night, so most everybody that's out is either up to no good or they've been followed. Don't let anybody come in. Then he takes 3 more, Peter, James, and John, and they pray, and he asks them to pray. The Bible says he goes a short stone's throw distance. That doesn't mean an outfielder aiming for home plate. It means if you tossed a stone right over there, we know it's fairly close because the disciples heard the first phrase of his prayer 3 times before they went to sleep. The prayer was, Father, if it's your will, let this cup pass from me. How did they know that? Because that's what they heard before they dozed off. I find it interesting. Jesus was really struggling, and he asked them, will you just pray with me? That gets me. Jesus had done so much for them. When they asked anything, he did it in answer to their prayer. But isn't it amazing? We expect the same. Jesus gives us all we have: breath to breathe, eyes to see, ears to hear, family to love, jobs to work, food on the table. And he asks of us, will you do this for me? Well, no, I'm too busy. No, I don't have time. Isn't that sad? We say, oh, how I love Jesus. That's a good song, but most people don't live it. That's the same with the disciples. When they were struggling with hunger in the city of Samaria, Jesus said, you go on in and get lunch, because he knew I have a divine appointment with a woman at the well. And she was the key to reaching every man in the city. When they struggled at storm on the sea, the Bible says he was up on a hilltop praying for them, and at night he came walking toward them while they were in a deep tempest. They struggled. He came to help them. When Peter was drowning, Jesus didn't say, not my problem, I'm tired. He reached out his hand and he lifted him up. When he was on the Mount of Transfiguration, a man brought his demon-possessed son. And the Bible says when Jesus came down, the man was so frustrated, said, I brought my boy to your disciples and they couldn't help him. What an indictment. Isn't it sad when they were struggling, Jesus was there. And on this night when his heart was heavy, he said, will you pray with me? And they slept. I kind of feel like that's the way the church is today with all the turmoil in the world. Jesus says, anybody awake down there is watchful? Anybody down there awake and burdened? Anybody there concerned? Are you praying? No, not yet. We hadn't come to that yet. Isn't that sad? Well, why was Jesus' heart so heavy? Well, I have no idea. We talk about the cross and its suffering, and Gethsemane its physical suffering, because I can't imagine its spiritual suffering. But here's what I know. Maybe his heart was heavy because three things. He was about to deal with the disobedience of all man's sin since the Garden of Eden. I've been accused a few times of saying or doing things I didn't say or do. It really got me. I couldn't get it off my mind. Here's Jesus, who's got every sin of every man, of every country, of every age since the beginning. And now he who had never even known sin is going to be accused as if he's the worst of sinners. That'd make my heart heavy. The Bible says he was sorrowful unto death. Not only deal with disobedience of man's sin, he was about to deal with God's disfavor. I know what it is when I feel guilt for something I've done, and it's just not right. Until I get that right, I just don't feel like there's a connection between God and me. Jesus had never known disfavor. God said in his earthly ministry, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am very well pleased. But suddenly when he became sin on the cross, the Bible says God, whose eyes are too pure to look on iniquity, turned his back. And what Moses delighted to see was the back of God. Jesus was broken to see because he had never known God to turn away. In fact, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then not only the disobedience of man's sin and the disfavor of God, now this one gets me. He was about to die. I do funerals, done them for 43 years, and it's not unexpected. Jesus is life, and he's the light of the world. The Bible says in him was life, and that life was the light of man. Wow. You telling me that the very life giver is about to go into a corridor he's never entered, and that's death? Yeah. You know what he was saying? Father, I've watched men die, and we knew death is the wages of sin. I've never experienced that. And the Bible says suddenly when he's looking right down the corridor, and now he's within hours of the cross, his heart's heavy. I'm about to experience what every man experiences because of sin, ending in death. My heart's really heavy. How heavy was it? The Bible says the capillaries in his forehead burst and he sweat drops like blood, and it dripped to the ground. You got to run a long way to drip sweat. Jesus had to pray with great intensity to drip blood like sweat. No wonder nobody wants to come to Gethsemane. It's not a pleasant experience. Some of you are there today though, aren't you? You just got news about a heart attack of somebody you love, and boy, the grief is enormous. You got word of cancer of somebody you love, and that weight is enormous. You found out your child is taking drugs, and you had no idea, and that weight's enormous. Your husband has had an affair, and that weight is enormous. You know what the Bible says of Jesus? Why did he have to go through that? Because he's our high priest, who was tested in all points just like we are. Why? So he could understand all of our struggles. But there's a difference between Christ and me. Yet he did it without sin. I want to invite you to Easter for sure. I want to invite you to celebrate the goodness of God's blessing. But along the way, don't forget what it cost for you and I to be called the children of God. God bless you.